Ah, game journalist. The internet just loves to hate them. At least I only hear from them if they make a stupid mistake or a dumb review. So today, let's look at some of the biggest problems I have with video game journalists and how they can be resolved. I also want to address some opinions about video game reviewing in general, but first, let's start with my problems. Remember the controversy that was created after VentureBeat posted a video of Dean Takahashi playing Cuphead? To say that he was bad at the game is an understatement. It was so embarrassing that even a 6-year-old kid could play the game better than him. It doesn't help that he is a game journalist with over 20 years of experience. Now, to give him some semblance of fairness, in the description of the video it is said that he doesn't like platformers and psych in general, and he was the only journalist there at Gamescom. This video isn't a review, but it also doesn't paint the game in a good way. It also brings up one of the biggest problems related to video game journalists in general, namely the lack of skill some reviewers have when playing certain types of video games. This isn't the only example of this problem, and I will address one other example in this video, and I'm sure there will be plenty of incidents in the future. This does raise some concern about video game news sites and the legitimacy of their reviews. If a journalist tells you a game is bad and the biggest problem is the difficulty, would you still believe him? The excuse about how the journalist didn't like platformers and side-scrollers raises another problem, namely the inconsistencies of some reviews because of the amount of diverse journalists working on these sites. Consider the difference between relying on YouTubers' reviews versus those of video game journalists. With a YouTuber, you become acquainted with their preferences over time. This gives the audience an idea about how much weight they want to assign to a review. For example, Video Game Donkey consistently dislikes RPGs, and if he rates one poorly, viewers might check other reviews first for a more balanced opinion. With a game journalist, like one from IGN or GameSpot, you can do that, which can cause misinformation to the audience. To give an example with my problems, let's start with one of the worst reviews of all time, namely the SpongeBob SquarePants Battle for Bikini Bottom re-edited review from GameSpot. He starts his video off with one of the last sections of the game to complain about the Mr. Krabs puzzle in the Murma layer that he has to solve to get the golden spatula. Kinda weird choice to start your review in one of the last sections of the game. It's like if somebody made a review about the original Super Mario Bros. And starts his review complaining about the level in World 8. Why don't you introduce the game first and put this later in your review? In this section, he mostly complains about how annoying the puzzle can be and that he hates how SpongeBob moves forward when he does his bowling animation. Now, to be fair, this part of the game is criticized by other reviewers and isn't the most fun part of the game. I also will admit that the moving forward thing with the bowling animation can be annoying in some parts of this game. Still, this problem could have been solved by simply not doing the puzzle since it's completely optional, or just standing behind the button to start the bowling animation so he can wind up his shot. After this, he finally introduces the game, where he is mostly positively talking about how the overworld has sliced and transferred Bikini Bottom in video game form. He calls it a SpongeBob museum and praises it for recreating the original charm. After that, it's back to negativity, and his biggest complaints from here on out are that some of the golden spatulas are very easy to collect and others are not, which is a very weird complaint because if you ever played another 3D platformer in your life, you know this will happen. Some things are easier to collect, some things are harder to collect. This gives me the impression that he doesn't play 3D platformers much. I don't know, because I don't know this guy. I don't know if he likes 3D platformers or if he doesn't like it. So you can see where the problem derives from not knowing what this reviewer likes and dislikes. After that, he complains about the general movement of the game. So he says that the game can feel kinda slow. Of course, I will admit it is not the fastest platforming alive, but I don't know what he defines as slow, or if there is really an issue, because I don't know his playstyle, if he is experienced enough in platformers to say if controls are good or bad. then he complains about the difficulty in the game. Here is a kinda hypocritical. In the beginning of the review he says that the game is rarely challenging, but in the entire reviews he's ranting about dying, constantly feeling punished. In one instance he complains about dying on top of the sandcastle. He literally spawns 5 meters from where he died, and he complains that he has to go all the way back. Like, if you just spawned where you died in front of a bunch of enemies, would that not be something to complain about? He also complains about stupid things. He gives a remark that it is ironic that nobody can swim. Like, did this guy never watch SpongeBob? The main demographic of this game is SpongeBob fans, and every SpongeBob fan should know that SpongeBob and Patrick can swim. I'm not sure about Sandy, but still, this is a stupid remark in general, since there are a lot of games where the video game character just dies when he touches water. He then also complains about invisible walls, which is also a weird complaint. He complains that it tempers him to be creative or to do things his way, which can be a valid complaint, but he doesn't give a good example, so this complaint is completely meaningless in this video. And his final complaint is that you have to use the bus swap in some levels. Now, to be fair, this is a valid criticism. It can be annoying sometimes, and it would be nice if you could just swap characters around like any other game. I also will mention that he does talk positively about the boss fights in this game, but that doesn't matter. In general, this review is just not informative or correct at all. Is this one of the best 3D platformers of all time? No, it's not. And there are things to criticize, like how none of the scripts or voices are changed. Looking at you, Mr. Krabs. It is very similar to the original, but this can also be seen as a positive or a negative depending on who you ask. In general, I would recommend this game to kids who like SpongeBob or fans who grew up with SpongeBob and with this game. But outside of this demographic, I wouldn't really recommend it. You see what I did there? I reviewed this game in 20 seconds and probably had a better review than this dude did in 7 minutes. Also, you can see where my problems lie with not knowing the skill level of how much he likes 3D platformers. Can I take his comment about the movement seriously or not? Can I take his comments about the difficulty seriously or not? Because it seems like he's just better at the game. So yeah, that are my biggest problems with video game reviewers. Now, before I say something else, I want to say some opinions about video game reviewer. To be an expert in a certain genre to review the video game of that genre? No, on the contrary. If you want to review a game of your first RPG, that's fine. It can even be helpful to people who want to look for an RPG that are more beginner friendly. But if you don't disclose your experience with this genre or how much games you have generally played, then we have a problem. I think it will be helpful for some reviewers to consider that they are just not so good at some types of video game genres and address that fact when reviewing that game. This gives that he is more transparent to the viewer isn't misinformed, and he knows that this is more a review from a beginner to a beginner. There are some positives for a beginner to make a review. A beginner can probably determine if a game is good for a beginner instead of a pro, but a beginner cannot make proper judgment about how the game has bad controls with the proper experience, advantages and disadvantages, but you need to disclose if you're experienced in 3D platformers or not. It would also help to just drop the point system in general. Like if you're one person, a point system can work, because it is going to be consistent, but when there are 2 or more people involved, it becomes completely useless and can lead to fair criticism about how one game gets a higher score than another and vice versa. Also, if you still want to implement a score system, please keep it at 7, 8, 9, 10, not 7.1, 7.2, like what's the difference? Nobody knows, nobody cares, just stay to round numbers please, thanks. Also, I don't know if the following idea can be easily implemented, but maybe you should try to implement certain things to criticize and look out for and avoid inconsistencies, like complaining about some things in some reviews but not in others, like saying one game has annoying fetch quest, the other has the same thing but it doesn't get criticized. That can be annoying and people will find inconsistencies between this and will call you out for your shit. But then again, I'm not a video game site, I don't know what I'm talking about. I will see you all guys next time. Bye.